Państwo, rozpoczynamy przedostatni panel w strefie SGH w dzisiejszym dniu. Oddaję głos moderatorce tego panelu, pani Agacie Stremeckiej.
Dziękuję bardzo. Witam Państwa serdecznie. Miło Państwa widzieć o późnej porze, że jeszcze macie ochotę posłuchać o czymś tak trudnym jak inflacja. Barbara Kolm, welcome. Barbara is a vice president of Austrian Central Bank, and we will be discussing inflation in Europe in general. Of course, your Austrian perspective is very interesting as well, because like you said, there are only few banks that are, I should say, conservative about what's happening around Europe. My name is Agata Stremecka. I'm CEO of Civil Development Forum in Poland. Eurozone inflation is now at the highest rate since the creation of euro, probably. And European Central Bank decided to raise interest rates for the first time, but they are still close to zero. Well, the deposit rate is zero, right? And Isabel Schnabel of the ECB recently said in Jackson Hole that the fight against inflation must be very tough and they have to be determined. So actually, how determined can the ECB be in this fight against inflation?
Well, thank you very much, and it's a great opportunity to discuss this hot topic and issue with you. Thank you for joining us here. First of all, I think you have to have a close look. Who is saying that we have to be very determined in fighting inflation at the central bank, at the ECB? There are certain people, those who probably don't want to fight inflation in the way that would be necessary. Schnabel definitely is one of those individuals who is pushing forward. But to be honest, the European Central Bank was too late, and it was too little that they came in with. And of course, as you might remember, already last November, certain people at the central banks claimed that it was inflation was transitory. We all, and I meant this by Austrian...
You stole my second question.
Oh, sorry, no. I will just go to what you mentioned right away. What is inflation? I mean, why did we not look at this? Where does inflation come from? And I think many people have forgotten that.
It's not only pandemic and the war.
Exactly, and that's the point. It's supply and demand side disruptions that we have seen. We have seen external shocks, and we have seen not only one external shock, namely COVID, but we have seen, in addition, a second external shock, which was the aggression of Russia to Ukraine. But before that, we have long time done a monetary policy that we should not have proceeded. I'm not a big fan of the PEP programs and the APP programs, the asset purchasing programs that we have put into action after the so-called financial crisis had hit Europe, which, in other words, was actually a sovereign debt crisis in Europe that became evident. And I think this is also one part of the things that we need to discuss, sovereign debt that needs to be taken care of. And has not been taken care of in many European countries. We have been kicking the can down the road for the last 10 years, more or less. There were very few after the European Stability Mechanism has been put into practice in 2012, 2013. We have been, and countries have been bailed out. Some countries have done their homework, but by homework I mean structural reforms. Really, truly structural reforms, meaning recalibration of spending and of government tasks. And that has not happened. And this brings us to a next topic before you ask the next question. And we should probably discuss it. If you
would say, maybe not percentage because it's difficult, but to what extent the current situation is the result of monetary factors and what's the result of from real factors, let's say?
Well, monetary policy definitely played a huge role. extend the amount of money in circulation, if you continue to print, if you put up this purchasing programs for way too long, and the amount of money that has been put on the table. Just if you look back in 2013, when we bailed out Greece, Portugal, Ireland, etc., and when we built the first umbrella, the amount was 750 billion. Now, just with the PEP programs that we did after COVID had hit Europe, we have 750 billion just from the ECB. We have 750 billion from the European Commission, plus we have all the other institutions that put more or less the same amount on the table. And this is just on the organizational side. If we look at what individual countries have put on the plate in order to raise their own debt levels, then, you know, we really look at a huge amount of money. So in order to make this question, or to answer this question, first of all, monetary policy. Then because of the lockdown, we killed the supply chains, which as a consequence of that had a price level, or the prices were rising, which is, you know, a disaster for inflation at the beginning, because you have only B2B, and then you have B2C, business to consumer prices that rise. And then, of course, the ultra shock was the gas prices, the energy prices that were rising. So you have everything that you have in your textbooks in one go.
But if we are talking about energy prices, can actually or should monetary policy somehow respond to situations like energy prices in Europe?
Well, I think monetary policy should be kept separate from fiscal policy and from policy that our politicians, whether it's on the national level or on the supranational level, I would have said conduct. So it should be kept separate, and there is no thing.
Do you see any politicians like this, very brave politicians in Europe like this?
Well, we might have an opportunity with a new Thatcher in Great Britain. I don't know Ms. Truss. We will see what she will do. At least she claims to follow what the Aaron lady, who in the 70s back then has definitely helped build a country that was not only bust, but total disaster.
It's like in Poland, we are talking about Leszek Balcerowicz, who should come back at a time like this, like Margaret Thatcher in England. Yeah. Probably. What about other European countries like Italy, France?
Well, you know, this is the point that I meant exactly. To my personal perspective, there should not be a hotline or a telephone line or even a freeway between Brussels and Frankfurt. You should keep monetary policy separate from fiscal policy and not intervene with each other. And right now we have put all eggs in one basket. And monetary policy is following what politicians want and desire, and vice versa. And this doesn't get us anywhere.
With a perspective like this in the European Central Bank, is there actually a dialogue like this that you can have? Do you have any allies from other countries with this way of thinking?
Well, you mentioned I'm Austrian, but I'm Austrian in two ways. I'm an Austrian economist in the tradition of the Austrian School of Economics, which is more conservative and more market-based. So who have a different approach towards monetary policy than, say, gentlemen like Draghi or Madame Lagarde, and people who have been in power for a very long time. So the question is, Austria is a small country. We own only a little share of the ECB, but there are a couple of other countries, also small countries, with solid and sound monetary policy, at least governors who apply those politics. And those voices are all of a sudden heard. You might remember, finally, we had the first interest hike in the last governmental meeting in June, late of June. And after 11 years, now the interest rates start rising again. The next meeting will take place this week, and the discussion is going the following. The Falcons keep saying, okay, we need to raise the interest rate minimum by 0.75. The others say, no, let's be more moderate. And in the end, we hope that we will get a good rise again to give signals to the markets. And
Probably
again,
it also depends on the United States or not.
well, you know, the Fed has been the first one to rise interest rates, and then it was the Bank of England, it was the Bank of Japan. All other banks have done so earlier, much earlier than we have. So now we have to kind of
I will
catch
not
up.
tell you all the stories about Polish raising interest rates because we are not in the Eurozone, so this discussion doesn't really matter, but it's also fun to observe it. It's probably you agree with me. You said that you are not only the Austrian Central Bank, you're Austrian because of your love towards freedom and Hayek, but you're also the president of the Hayek Institute. And late Hayek, I would say, was the great opponent of the state monopoly on money production, right? And I have this really nice quote here. He wrote in Law, Legislation and Liberty, I have been led to the firm conviction that a free economic system will never again work satisfactorily, and we shall never remove its most serious defects or stop the steady growth of government unless the monopoly of the issue of money is taken from government. Is it actually possible for the trend towards the growing importance of central banking that actually there will be free competition in the area of money making?
Well, of course, competition in the area of money making would be ideal. I mean, we believe in markets, and so I'm wearing two hats now, and it's kind of difficult for me to interact in between and say, as a central banker, I would support sound monetary policy. But as a Hayekian, I would say, okay, let's come up with good ways of competition and, finish this fiat money production by institutions. Allow private money and allow competition of whatever stable coins and other options, even cash, gold, whatever you find, what you define as a value and what people want to exchange with, that people trust.
Do you have
in.
Bitcoins?
Trust, yes, but trust. I think trust is the key element. And if people lose trust in the institutions and as well in the currency, then we see what the outcome that we have, that has been presented to us.
But probably the problem with the trust is that they are so combined with politicians in all countries. How can you trust a money maker, let's say, who is so dependent on fiscal and political decisions, right?
Well, and this comes, here we have to quote another Nobel laureate, Jim Buchanan, who became famous for his theory on why politicians want to be re-elected, public choice theory. And he claimed and he explained very nicely that, you give away other people's money. If you're a politician, you take it from the taxpayer, redistribute it, and because you want to be re-elected. And unless we break this, or unless we explain it better to the individuals, that they understand what is happening with their money and who is spending it and why, I think we are in a deadlock. And I think this is why we should constantly ask the question, what is the task of the state? And how much state do we want, and how much money do we provide to the state? Reagan was very wise on that, and he said, reduce the taxes, kind of starve the beast, and make sure that, no more tasks are being added.
In terms of, because you said that people should know where what's happening to their money and to the taxes they pay. So there was one polling, I think, a few years ago, and people in Poland were asked what kind of taxes do they pay, and 62% of people said that they don't pay VAT.
Well, this is why we need economic education and financial education, and make sure people understand what it means, and that 1 and 1 just makes 2, and that you can only create added value if you act in an economic way, meaning exchanging goods and services, and believing in supply and demand, and not outmaneuver the laws of the market.
We have only 2 minutes left, so I would like to ask you whether you have any questions from the audience, because it's a really special occasion to have a central banker and a free marketer in the same person. So maybe somebody, czy ktoś z Państwa może pytanie?
Do you believe it was a good decision to introduce euro as the common currency for all countries? Or like most countries in the European Union?
Sorry,
Was euro a good decision to be introduced as a common currency for all the countries? Oh, like most of the countries in the European Union?
Well, thank you very much for this wonderful question. I mean, I think the euro has a lot of flaws. And we unfortunately have not managed to fix those flaws when we could have had when we have had the opportunity when the financial crisis had hit Europe in 2008. All those flaws became evident, and the imbalances. I mean, luckily, not. Our countries are diverse, and this is what Europe makes it to be a great place, that we compete with each other, and that we are not one size fits all, and that Greece is different than Germany is, and we don't have to argue about that. But this is, we don't want centrally planned economies, and we don't want centrally planned issued money, and we should allow people to choose, and individuals to choose. And these days, with all the modern tools of IT, who cares what currency you pay in? You use either digital money or you use cash in whatever. As long as trust is there, it is being accepted. And that's something that we need to rebuild, trust in the means of exchange. And of course,
And you believe it's possible?
Well, if we want to survive and compete, and not be left alone as Europe, we need to stand up again and look at our first principles. Europe has always been most successful when economic entities were bigger than political ones. In other words, when we were able to compete with each other, when we were innovative and creative, and when our entrepreneurs were allowed freedom and our individuals to choose. And that made Europe big and great and successful, and not the other way around.
And it's a beautiful ending of our discussion. Thank you so much, Barbara, for coming, especially for this evening, especially for you from Vienna. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Agata.